Alright, Common Core Algebra 2, here is our first actual flip lessons that you'll need to be taking notes on. So remember, if I am going too fast, you're going to need to pause and make sure you get everything down. It's really important that you have these notes written, not that you just watch the videos. And then also taking your time to answer the questions completely. Remember, those are also for extra credit. So today's lesson is going to be pretty quick. You see we just have really 4 slides there. The 5 is just a repeat of the first one. And we're going to talk about what are called the properties of real numbers. So in order to do that, we need to talk about what are some subsets of the real numbers, meaning smaller groups of numbers. And most of these you've probably seen before, or at least heard the term, but we're going to review it real quick just to set us up for our year and things that we need to know. So the first piece is what are called the whole numbers. Well, the whole numbers are any positive integers and also including 0. So when we say positive integers, you want to think about numbers that are used for counting. Okay, they're often also called the counting set and 0. Then to talk about what integers are, whole numbers are a subset of the integers, meaning the whole numbers are part of the integers plus all of their negative values as well. So if you think about 0, 1, 2, 3, 1 billion, then we also have the negative values, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 1 billion. Okay, moving on, bigger than the whole numbers and the integers then is what are called the rational numbers. So they include, again, the whole numbers and integers are a subset of the rational numbers, but they also include anything that can be written as a quotient of integers, which means a fraction. Don't forget that. Quotient just means division, and division just means fraction. And also, in addition to fractions, would be numbers that can be written as a decimal that either terminates, meaning it ends, like 0.6 or 0.523, or it's going to repeat forever, and you can think of, in this case, something like 2 over 3, which repeats 0.66666 forever. And then a completely different subset of numbers, which does not include any of the 3 that we just talked about, are what are called the irrational numbers, meaning they are the opposite of the rational numbers. They cannot be written as a quotient, meaning they cannot be written as a fraction, and they will never repeat and they will never terminate. So some examples of those, like we have here, the whole numbers you see, we have a great visual here that I would copy down if I were you. 0, 5, 16, so we have positive integers like 5 and 16, and also the 0. And then our integers are going to include all of those whole numbers, and then also the negative values, negative 4, negative 1, negative 27, we could have negative 5, negative 16. And then going one set larger, we have our rational numbers. So you see they include all the whole numbers, all the integers, and then any fraction that terminates, like 0.75, 3 over 4, or one that repeats, like negative 1 over 3 is negative 0.333, and that's going to go on forever. Okay, separate from this group of numbers, the rationals, integers, and wholes, are what are called the irrational numbers. And examples of these would be something like the square root of 2, or negative square root of 14, or pi. A lot of square root values are irrational numbers, but you'd want to be careful because we could say something like the square root of 9, and the square root of 9, even though it looks weird, is actually a whole number because the square root of 9 is equal to, can simplify, 3. So when we talk about putting numbers in a set, it has to be the most simplified version of the number. For example, square root of 9 is 3, or we could say the square root of 16 even, which is 4, would also be a whole number. Which brings us to what the real numbers are. Well, the real numbers are just the collection of all these numbers that we just talked about. So it's called a set of numbers that includes all of the rationals, which includes the integers, which includes the whole numbers. And in addition, the real numbers also include the irrational numbers. So far, really, you guys have probably not explored much other than your real numbers. So it seems kind of weird because we're talking about all these real numbers, when in reality there's a whole other set of numbers out there that we haven't talked about and that we're going to hit on later this year that are called the imaginary numbers, or also called complex numbers. Okay, but we'll get to that later. Right now, the only thing you need to remember is what we talked about today, the real numbers and their sets that they have and how you would classify each of them. So something you can see on the test, I could give you some number and ask you to define as completely as possible which set it would fall in. Okay, and then if we were to give you a list of numbers, here we only have 2, but could give you a list of like 10 numbers and talk about how we would write them on a number line or how we would put them in order. For example, negative 5 over 4. One good way that helps me all the time that I can think about is write them as decimals and think about where would they go. So negative 5 over 4 would be negative 1.25. So I know that's in between -1 and -2, closer to -1. So I'm going to write that right there, -5/4. And then square root of 3, if I put that in the calculator, is about 1.73, and then it's going to go on forever. So I know that's in between 1 and 2, but it's got to be a lot closer to 2. So I'm going to write that right there and label that as the square root of 3. Okay, so that is it for the video lesson. Hopefully you took your time and wrote down all of the notes that you needed to write down. Make sure you have all those definitions, as well as that Venn diagram, as well as that last example that I wrote down. I'm not giving you any extra information here, so you really need to write down everything that you see on the screen. Okay, we'll see you in class, where we will talk about classifying some numbers and work together as a class to create a list or a graph.